We could be here for the next 14 weeks if we wanted to go into the details of the workings of the mind. So this is an overall view.
Let's take a look at the difference, though, between the brain and the mind. We use those words in our society interchangeably, and they're really different. First of all, the brain is the organ, and the mind is the processes that go on in the brain, the process of the organ. That's the difference between the two of them. A lot more to it than that, but that's the most simplistic way we can get it across. Let's take a look at a few things. First of all, some definitions. Take a look at conscious. That's the thinking, cognizant, aware part of the brain. We had a friend of ours that was going through a seminar, and he says, no, that's not really the real definition of conscious. I says, what is the definition? He says, conscious is that annoying time between naps.
When you have to think, be cognizant, and be aware.
Take a look at another definition. The subconscious or the unconscious. Now, we've heard some Christians say there is no such thing. Well, because the subconscious is a Freudian word, and we got to stay away from Freudianism. Well, let's take a look at that word for a minute. What does the word submarine mean? Below the water. So the prefix sub means what? Below. Below what? The conscious. What is the conscious? What you're thinking of right now. So what you're not thinking of, everything that's ever happened to you in your life. You're not thinking about coming in here and sitting down in the chair, and that chair would hold you up okay. Actually,
it's impossible to think about multiple things at the same time.
You just can't do that. So there's a lot of things going on in the sub, below the conscious, subconscious. Let's take a look at what's going on down there. Subconscious is beneath the thinking level. It's the storage place for information. It makes no value judgments. The subconscious mind makes no value judgments. It doesn't know the difference between right or wrong. It has no conscience. In other words, no morals. It doesn't know the difference between itself and others. Now watch this. My subconscious mind does not know the difference between me and my wife. So when I talk to my wife, I'm really talking to what? Myself. Watch this. So if I'm critical of my wife, I'm being critical of my what? Self, plus the guilt that goes along with that. Almost like God knew what he was talking about when Christ said, judge not, lest you are judged. It's almost like God knows how the mind works.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
It also is the driving force behind our thoughts and our feelings.
And our behaviors.
Let's take a look at that in a graphic form. We've got Mr. Conscious up here, and he's cognizant, and he's aware, and he's thinking of everything around him. We got Mr. Unconscious, or the subconscious underneath. Beneath the thinking level, filling of the filing cabinet of all previous experiences, forms habits and actions without thinking, has no conscience, doesn't know the difference between right and wrong, and can't distinguish itself between itself and others. So Mr. Conscious up here walks around, and he's having a good old time, and Mr. Unconscious winds up coming up and pushing Mr. Conscious around and making it do what it wants it done. I do those things that I don't want to do, and I don't do the things I really should do.
Where have you heard that before? It's in Paul's writings, exactly.
We're not giving excuses here. We're giving reasons so we can understand what's going on, so we can understand the true force of the will and how to deal with that will.
So what is in our subconscious mind? All of our previous experiences.
Including the stuff that happened to us in the womb.
And all of that orchestrates how we think, how we feel, and therefore how we behave.
So that unconscious mind comes up and pushes us around and makes us do things we really don't want to do. Ooh, my. And you thought you were nutty in a fruitcake. No, You're human. And what we need to understand is the dynamics that are going on in the brain so we can change by God's grace. Another definition, forgetting.
Forgetting is the quality or the ability which is God-like alone. Humans do not actually forget. We either delete, which is an automatic process because of the filters that we have put in our mind from previous experiences. So at any given moment, literally any given second, 100,000 messages are bombarding our mind.
You're making a lot of them right now.
What do we do with them all? How would it be possible to hold on to 100,000 different messages per second for a lifetime? Well, it isn't. And so, of course, the mind deletes what it thinks is irrelevant and immaterial, but it holds on to things that matter.
Does Nancy's mind hold on to everything that I see?
No, of course not.
Her filters are different than mine. Why? Because she was brought up in a different atmosphere than I was, a different home than I was, and she has a different personality than I do.
So we either delete or we repress. And repression is a God-given mechanism designed to protect the very fragile human mind. Repression takes a memory that is very painful and in some instances puts it in a locked filing cabinet drawer and makes that memory inaccessible to us. Now hear this. There are a lot of controversies running around about repressed memories and whose job it is to dig up the dirt from the past and whose job it is to tell us what happened to us in our past. Ron and I believe very strongly there is only one person beside you who knows exactly what happened to you, and that is God. Now, if that is the case, if you and God are the only ones who really know what happened to you, and you can't remember what happened to you, whose job is it to return to you a memory? Whose? God's the only other one who knows.
If he deems it necessary.
No counselor, no therapist, no pastor, no marital partner, or no would-be psychologist has the right to tell you what happened to you in your childhood. And do we believe in hypnotic trances to dig into our deep, dark past? No, we do not. No, we do not. Do you know that God is faithful? And He will return to you a memory if and when He deems it's necessary and in a safe place and a safe environment of people around you who can be supportive to you. And at a time in your life, specifically, when regaining that memory would let you recover from it. And not until, and that's that. Do you understand? So this is not about you trying to bite your fingernails enough so you can figure out what happened to you. Oh, there are some symptoms you can look at and then take it backwards and think, wow, I've got all of those, so maybe that's the wound. Now, was this possible? And then, God, if you want me to know, would you reveal it to me? And He will. And He will. He has for many.
Let's go back to your page in your workbook again, page 3, where it talks about the definition of the mind. It's all the way down to the bottom, so you don't have to write it down. What is the definition of the mind? It is a multi-sensory collection of successive experiences of the present moment. Boy, does that sound weird. Well, let's take a look at that. Let's break it down. Here's you got the brain. We got multi-sensory. What is multi-sensory? Well, you got sight, smell, taste, sound, and touch. That's multi-sensory. So it's a multi-sensory collection of successive experiences of the present moment.
So it's one right after the other experiences. And you will notice that under the list on page 3, there's a blank line, and that's for you to write in internal emotions, because you can bring up old stuff just by internal feelings and emotions.
So we start making records according to science at conception in our brain. All these memories, we got little CDs here that we've put it on, and we're making these memories all through our life. You're making a memory as we speak today. Somebody says Pacific Health next week, and you're going to say, ooh, yeah, I went to that seminar. You talk about a seminar 3 weeks from now, you're going to come back to this, because it's going in, all this seminar is going in and making a record.
Now, what's interesting is the sight of this room is going to one place in your brain. The sound of our voices, or whatever sound you might hear around you, is going to another place in your brain. The smell, that will go to another place in your brain. The taste of lunch will go to another place in your brain. And the touch or the feel, the chair beneath you, the hard surface of the table in front of you will go to another area of your brain. And the emotions you experienced, like this young woman down here in the front row who says, I need a shrink, after the last process, will go to another place in your brain. They do not all go in just like a record, one right after the other. They each have their compartments.
So that stimulus then comes in from the outside. What stimulus? Whether it be sight, sound, any of this, the senses or emotions, that could be external or internal, goes in and comes up through all those records and files through those records and finds anything that's anywhere near the present record and derives the behaviors and the thinking processes. Stimulus what? Yields response. That's the formula that we work under. Stimulus yields response.
Just like Pavlov's dog. Do you remember Pavlov? He rang a dinner bell and simultaneously showed his German shepherd a piece of raw meat. And what did the German shepherd do? He salivated at the sight of the meat. And after Pavlov did this a number of times, he then just rang the bell and left the meat elsewhere. And the dog still salivated. So out of that experiment, we learned about conditioned response.
And this is where most of us operate at most of the time. Is most of our lives are in hyper alert and are in total response to the fire that is operating at this moment. So whatever stimulus comes up, we respond to it accordingly. That is what we call reality, the animal nature, because that is the response system that animals have. That's all they have, is stimulus, response, stimulus, response. Change the stimulus, you get a different response. So what makes us different as human beings? Well, we can put something in there, and that is choice. When we put choice in the middle, stimulus, oh, I've got a choice, response. The problem lies in that in order to have choice, you have to have one thing. Any idea what that is? Knowledge. You have to have the right knowledge to make the right choice.
If there was only one kind of automobile in your experience, let's say it was a Ford, and you had absolutely no idea that there was such things as a Pontiac, an Oldsmobile, a Subaru, a Honda, etc., etc. How would you ever make a choice? You would just be buying Fords from now till forevermore. When all the options are set in front of you, new knowledge, oh, well, I'll look at this one and this one and this one and this one and this one, and then based on my needs and what seems most sensible for me, I will make a choice.
I remember when we were living in North Dakota again. I used to go to the farmers and my church members years ago, and they would say, "Well, we don't need this kind of stuff." I said, "Why?" "Well, we have got the Bible, and that's all we need." I said, "Well, let me ask you a question. When you first started farming, what did you use? Your grandfather, what did he start using?" "Well, it was a horse and a plow." "So where did you go from there?" "And what do you use today?" "He's got a combine. It's about a story high. He's got to draw, it's way up there in the air." I said, "What do you buy that kind of equipment for?" "Well, you have to have that today." "Well, whoever told you that idea? If you brought that to your father, would your grandfather, would he use that?" "No." "What makes the difference between you and your grandfather?" You know what he said? Knowledge. The difference that makes to us today between what they operated in our spiritual lives and today is knowledge. Today we've got the reasons for our behaviors and the tools to know how to change them by God's grace. You put that together with the knowledge we have today in science and put that together with the gospel, and you can begin to see that God in reality is alive and well, and he has got this in the Word all along. But we haven't understood it because we didn't have the knowledge to know how his Word really was there to teach us.
So we don't have to live the rest of our lives reacting to everything going on around us.
We can actually make choices. Most of us live a reactive lifestyle. Something comes up, react to it. I remember years ago, Nancy, when we first got married, about a week and a half, 2 weeks after moving into our new home, starting college, one evening when we weren't screaming and hollering at each other, and Nancy gave up very shortly on screaming with me because I had a voice back then that would shake the rafters. I learned well from my father. And she would say, well, she said this one evening, "Honey, would you like to have a cup of tea?"
Well, almost. "Would you like a cup of tea, love?"
Oh, yeah. And back in those, English, tea is for everything. If you're hurting, you have a cup of tea. If you're feeling good, you have a cup of tea. If you're, everything's tea.
Actually, it still is.
Oh.
But go ahead.
So would you like to have a cup of tea, love? And I said, sure. So I'm sitting there, she brings me the cup of tea, and I said, thanks. She says, what are you angry about? I'm not angry. Well, you sound angry. You're making me angry. And we get caught up on that every time she would make a cup of tea for me. Couldn't figure this out. 10 years went by.
If I had been smart, I would have quit making tea. You know that? But to tell you the truth, I was probably being selfish. Because whenever I would sense the tension, I would figure a cup of tea will help. Because that's the English in me.
And when you weren't sensing tension, you'd still make a cup of tea.
Well, that's true. But if I'd been smart, I would have said, I'll do without the tea, and then we won't have to go through this again.
Well, it took us 10 years before we began to see really what was going on. And really what was going on is all of a sudden the thought came to me that I was around 4 years of age when I started seeing this. My mother was a professional baker, and on Saturdays when she was off work, she would make this huge ball of dough on Saturday mornings. And then she would make kuchen and Danish, and all kinds of coffee cakes, everything under the sun. And every flat surface in the house had pastries on it.
This woman could make 2 figure-8 Danish simultaneously, one with each hand. And then she would fill them with apricot and raspberry and lemon and
poppy seed.
And poppy seed.
And what happened was, by 6 o'clock in the evening, the neighbors would know that my mother was doing a lot of cooking that day, and they'd come over for a social. Well, my home, if you were seen, the children wanted to be seen but not heard, but if you saw me, you heard me. And my mother would grab me by the hair, because I wouldn't go willingly, and just drag me down to and shove me down to my room, to put me in my room and lock me in my room. Now you look at my beginnings. How was I feeling about her putting me in there and not being able to socialize with everybody? Feeling what? Rejected. And I had my ear plastered to that wall or to that door and listening to all that was going on. And I heard them, my mother talking, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. And then I heard them laughing. What am I thinking now? That they're what? Laughing at me. And then I heard coffee being poured in a cup, and the noise of coffee being poured in a cup, and the laughter, and me feeling rejected sent me straight to a number 10. So then when I get later on into an intimate relationship with my wife, and I hear the noise of water being poured in a cup, all of a sudden, out of the clear blue, stimulus, noise, going to the response, which is a reactive lifestyle, goes back to childhood. I have no memories of it. It still reacts to it in my life, and I'm in a number 10 rage when she hands me a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or whatever it might be, where the water is going in. I go ballistic.
It was the noise that set you off. And you know what? As that memory began to return to you, you would start saying to me, every time I would be fixing a cup of tea, you would say, I don't like that noise. And I would say, I'm sorry, I can't think of any other way to get the tea in the cup. And we would go on. You know, sometimes he'd act a little miffed. But seemingly it helped for you to say, I don't like that noise.
Yeah.
It took some of the punch out of it.
It was the confessing.
But it took about 10 years for the whole truth to come back before you actually got the real reason. Did you then get a picture of the little boy with his ear against the door?
No. And does that bother me today? No. But yes. Wait a minute, no, yes. No, most of the time, and here's another law of the mind, and it's critical that you get that. You'll hear that again later on in the weekend.
And as a matter of fact, we'll put it up on the screen for you later so that you can copy this.
With every period of exhaustion, it doesn't matter what causes the exhaustion, overwork, overstress, or whatever the cause, or lack of sleep, with every period of exhaustion, there is a corresponding period of depression that goes to our weakest point at that moment. So when I get very, very tired, what is my weakest point? Feeling what? Rejected. So I become very sensitive and super sensitive to anything that might look like rejection around me, especially from those who are closest to me. So with every period of exhaustion, there's a corresponding period of depression that goes to my weakest point, looking for rejection. And do I find it? Yes, because she is still human.
And even if I wasn't rejecting you, your mind would manufacture it, because rejected individuals always look for rejection. And guess what? If they don't find it under some rock, they manufacture it themselves in order to keep themselves right.
And all of this is fixable, so fixable. That's the joys of recovery. You can really have a life that does not control your life.
Now, there's another piece about the human mind which you should know. And actually, this is pretty awesome. There is a woman who wrote an inventory 30 years ago and has been perfecting it ever since. And Ron and I have had the privilege of sitting at her feet and learning all about the 4 lobes of the brain and what their specific gifts are and how that impacts the way we think and the way we feel and the way we relate to others and what we choose for careers and every aspect of the human life. The human brain, with its lumps and bumps and grooves, and by the way, those grooves are made by habits, repeatedly doing the same thing over and over again, creates those little crevices. And the more times we do the exact same thing, the deeper the crevice. So it's very interesting. If you would compare the brain, let's say, of a rat to the brain of a human being, the brain of a rat is basically smooth. The brain of a human being is lots of humps and bumps. So notice that the brain seems to have two halves, and that is true, it does. A left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. The right hemisphere of the brain has a specific focus, and that focus is on relating or relationships. The right brain is very relational. The left brain, on the other hand, is more about functioning. So the left brain is about functioning, the right brain is about relating. So let's take a look then at what these four different lobes have to offer, starting with basal right. And you know, if you want to take some of this down in your notes, a good way to do would just be make a big oval and divide it in quarters. Basal right is about harmony. And people who have basal right as their main function, or as their gift, as we call it, like to harmonize sounds and sight, words, music, relationships. Everything must be in harmony. And you know what? Ron and I believe that babies are born with basal right being the primary function because they need to harmonize in relationship to their mothers and to their fathers.
And science has shown that over the years now, that that is the part of the brain that is activated when a child is born.
Now let's take a look at another quadrant, frontal right. And the frontal right lobe of the brain is about visioning. People who have this as a gift can see way down the road. They are extremely creative. They see the world and words and concepts in pictures in their mind, whereas basal right sees more in feeling and in innuendos and intricate feelings and relationship. Looking now at basal left, this quadrant is about sequencing, putting things in order. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this. It's progressive. And in that quadrant of the brain, there are words and there are numbers. And these people are good at both. They're usually pretty good in spelling, and they're pretty good in mathematics. And then there's frontal left. And these people are producers. Now, I want you to understand something here. This is not temperament theory. It may look like it to you, but it is not temperament theory.
We've done a lot of research over the years, and what we have found is that the traditional personality inventories that shows personality is what it's really testing is our adapted personality because of damage. We've adapted to something that is not really our true self.
And when you put together the wounds with which quadrant of the brain is your highest gift, can you understand a great deal about yourself? It is absolutely mind-blowing.
Now, let me ask you a question. Out of that right brain, left brain, which one is the school system teaching in? Left brain. It's about producing and sequencing. Now, what happens to a young man or a young lady, for me, who is a frontal right visionary, who sees in pictures? Well, I'll tell you what happens to them in the school system today. They become labeled as ADD, ADHD, because they can't sit still, they don't fit in boxes, they don't think in the boxes of the traditional way of teaching things. They think outside of the boxes. I'm looking at a few of you right now, I can point you out, that you, my lens, are you talking about me? Yes, I am. Because really what's happening, and you know what I'm talking about, what happens is a young man who's been brought up and now born with a frontal right visionary concept, he doesn't feel like he belongs anywhere. He doesn't feel like he belongs in the school system. He doesn't even believe like, what is wrong with me? I don't feel like I'm matching up to my parents. Then he winds up going to church. He doesn't feel like he belongs in the church, because church is about what? Boxes as well. He doesn't feel like he fits there either. So I'm so screwed up, I don't belong anywhere. So he winds up becoming a loner. But in reality, he's a visionary. And he's got some phenomenal abilities to see things from the beginning to the end. He can see how things today wind up producing certain results 3, 4, 5 years from now.
And what's really fascinating is that we have a grandson who has frontal right as a gift. And he's a brilliant kid. He's 16 now. He's absolutely a brilliant kid, and we've known this all along. But he hasn't, because he has a major wound. And the major wound is from his father, the one who's to be his model, you see. And as a result of that, the wound combined with his frontal right creates that this is a boy in school who cannot sit still. He wants to be under the desk, on top of the desk, walking around, talking to people, anything but doing basal left sequencing. So in school, he's a problem. And, you know, they want to put him on Ritalin and other drugs to slow him down, settle him out, do something. But, you know, it was really kind of funny, because last summer he came to our house and spent a week. And we decided we would test him about this, and discovered what we already knew was true. And that is, he is a double right. He is gifted both in visioning and in harmony. But visioning is his primary. So yeah, he's the typical kid who can't sit still. And you know what? He would do his homework. And his mom would look at his homework, or his dad would look at his homework and say, well, there isn't a thing wrong with this. It's perfect. So why is he bringing C's and D's home on his report card? Because he never turned in his homework, which is very typical of the frontal right. They do it, but they won't turn it in. They don't want to be in the box.
They also don't like to do formulas the way they're taught to formula. They come up with other formulas to get things done easier.
Mm-hmm. Their own methods.
Their own methods.
Yes.
Now what happens is that for me, being a frontal right, I wasn't allowed to be there in the school system, I wasn't allowed to be there in my church, and I wasn't allowed to be there at home. So for a male, they usually move from frontal left to frontal left, from frontal right to frontal left in order to survive. And to do that, it takes 100 times more energy to cross over that brain, the mid divider points in the brain.
You see, there are commissures, or a band of neurons that connect right and left brain. And in a boy at puberty, 40% of those connectors, those commissures, are washed out. So that makes a boy more focused than a girl. Whereas a girl does not have that wash at puberty, therefore she can relate everything to everything. And as a wife and a mother, she can have a load of clothes in the wash, a load of clothes in the dryer, a load of dishes in the dishwasher. She can have soup on the stove, a cake in the oven. She can be watching 3 toddlers around her, talking on the phone and watching Oprah, all at the same time. And she can pull it all off. She knows when to pull the clothes out of the washer and put it in the dryer, and how to coordinate all of this stuff. And a guy says, look, it's time to do the wash, we're doing the wash. Forget the Oprah, forget everything else, we're doing the laundry.
To put it in another context, a little bit more simplistic one. Women are kind of like the old Christmas tree bulbs. You know, you got the Christmas tree full of bulbs. One bulb goes out, the whole string goes out.
That's
One thing
us.
goes wrong in her life, everything in her life is affected by that one bulb going out. And men tend to be like used parking lot bulbs. You know, those string of bulbs over, one bulb goes out, 2 bulbs go out, doesn't matter, the guy keeps it. As long as there's one bulb showing and one bulb burning, it's all that's important.
Yeah, we are quite different, aren't we?
Doesn't make one wrong and the other one right. We just come at it differently.
So now, when we are wounded in childhood, and I'm going to give you my example, okay? I'll let you into my brain here for a couple of moments. What happens is my gift is frontal right, but my secondary gift is basal right. I'm a double right. In childhood, the frontal right child, me, was Shirley Temple, bubbly, effervescent. Remember, I was the neighborhood alarm clock, woke everybody at 6 a.m. singing Jerusalem, and all the rest of that. But you know, my parents looked at that and they got a little nervous because remember, they had lost my brother already and they had only me. And there were going to be no more children. My mother wasn't able. So, considering that, they decided we can't let her be bubbly, effervescent, life of the party, full of fun. We got to slow her down. Now, the interesting thing of it is there are a few lateral commissures. The majority of commissures are right to left and left to right. There are a few laterals. So when a girl is going to make a move to live in a quadrant of her brain that is not really her gift, she uses the laterals and she goes to basal right. Whereas a young boy would use the left to right commissures and go to frontal left. So I came down here to basal right. And in basal right, I am super sensitive. And anyway, I have a high gift in that area. And so I'm sensitive to my own pain. I'm sensitive to everybody else's pain, and I want to speak to that. So I used to go to the nursing home where my grandmother was, and I used to take care of all the little old ladies. And I would sit holding hands with ones who were dying. And I would be nurturing and loving, and I would want to go to their funerals when they died, and I would cry over them. And my mother said, "This can't happen. She's going to be a nurse. She can't behave like this with her patients. It'll kill her." And besides which, they didn't like the tearfulness. But you see, down there in harmony, I could look at them and I could know by the look on their face, the tone of their voice, body language, exactly what was going on up here. So I knew when to duck. Well, they didn't like that. They mostly didn't like the sensitivity. So they're going to move me again. They don't know they're moving me, but they're trying to change my behavior. So now where am I going to go? Back up to frontal right? No, that'll make me Shirley Temple again. I can't go to frontal left because there are no kitty corner connectors. So the only other place I can go is basal left, sequencing. And when I went to basal left, that's where I sat with my thumb in my mouth, fetal position, on the end of the couch, letting the world pass me by. When you make a move from your gift, frontal right to basal right, you use 100 times more energy. Where are you going to get it? You see, it's oxygen that fuels the brain. And 20% of the oxygen in our body is used by the brain, 80% by the body. So if I need more oxygen in order to operate in basal right, I'm going to have to steal it from my body. Then I don't have adequate oxygen in my body, so my body begins to what? Deteriorate, break down. Well, now I'm going to make another move because they don't like this supersensitivity. So, and besides which, another wound impacted that, which was the sexual abuse that I wasn't talking about or sharing with anybody. So I move now over here to basal left. And again, up to 100 times more energy to make that move. Now I'm stealing from my body again. But I finally go away to college. Wow, I'm free. And so I go back to my frontal right. I'm Shirley Temple, life of the party, involved in everything, full of fun.
And she wasn't sick in college. She was fine in college.
I was excellent in college. I had more fun than anybody should ever have. But of course, that was only for 1 year. That was pre-nursing. And then I went into nurses training and big time got in touch with basal right, because that's part of my gift anyway. And I saw wounded, hurting people, and I hurt for them and with them. Well, finally, the time came. I graduated from nurses training. I'm free again, don't have to be in school. Yay, rah, rah. I can go out and do what I'm trained to do. And so I do that, and I meet this wonderful man. And he sees me, life of the party, full of fun. Wow, and don't forget those legs. So
3 weeks before we got married, I sat Nancy down on the front porch of my mother's home. And I said, before we get married, I have to get something straight with you. And she said, what? I said, you're the most conceited thing I've ever seen on the face of the earth. And from now on in our relationship, you're going to live in the back seat. I'm going to live in the front seat. I'm going to be a minister, and you're going to be my wife, and you're going to be there to support me and make me look good. And if you don't like it, there's the door. They'll let you head it on your backside and the way out. That's 3 weeks before we get married.
And people say, you married it? And I say, absolutely. I was a shoo-in for that. Why? My father had set me up. And
Doesn't
anyway,
make him
no
bad.
good man was going to want me, remember? So I married him. And yes, I was the bubbly effervescent, but not for long. Because he was afraid that bubbly effervescent was going to have an affair with somebody else. So the payphone went into the parsonage, if you recall, and he never let me go to a baby shower because there might be a woman there I might have an affair with. Or any other function, there was always some excuse that I couldn't go.
I had such major rejection issues about her leaving me that I made sure that there was no male dogs in the house, no male cats. My children couldn't have male fish, and I was looking to see which were the male and female plants because the males were going to go out the door before I started my recovery.
This is true. This is true.
I can laugh at it today, but I look back at it.
So he moved me then back to basal right when everything was about harmony, and my ability to look at his facial expressions, hear the tone of voice, listen to his feet on the steps. I could tell what was coming. And I knew when to duck. I knew when to get out of the way.
So she also was into tears a lot, and I didn't go for tears.
See, that's the negative part of harmony, is the sadness, the tears that come with it. And he couldn't handle that. He would go and rage when I cried. So where in the world am I going to go? Back over to basal left. Well, at least I didn't go back to sucking my thumb. That was good.
So this life of the party, wonderful, outgoing young lady that I married, that I fell in love with, turned into a morose, depressed thing, drove me insane. And she was sick all the time. Now watch this.
Now, why was I sick? Because the oxygen is being taken from my body in order to live in a quadrant of my brain that is not highly energized with oxygen.
Her face started getting rashes, and then they started weeping with kind of a pustule type weep coming out of her face, and she did that purposely so she wouldn't kiss me.
Mm-hmm.
See what's happening with my rejection issues? And then she was always getting sick. Her body, she mostly had female problems. Oh, to keep me at a distance there too. See, it's all about rejecting me.
Now, was I purposely doing this? No, of course not. My body was simply responding to having to live a lie, being somebody I was not. It wasn't purposeful against him. But I will tell you what, about 12 years into the marriage, it was easier to go to the edge of the cliff and wish to jump than it was to stay in the mess I was in.
And I was so enraged at that point. I said, well, jump and get it over with. And she says, I don't know. And she was crying, and I said, you want me to come out here and help you? This is where we began to take a look that we were really messed up.
Mm-hmm. Really messed up. And quite frankly, the only thing that prevented me from jumping was that looking down into the water beneath me, I saw the face of my 2 children. And I just couldn't do it to them.
And to come from that to what we have today. One gentleman came to me at one of our meetings and said, you know, when Christ comes, what would you say to him if he said to you, I'm sorry, Ron, you didn't make it? And I couldn't believe what came out of my mouth. That quick, just came right out. I would have said I would praise his name as I burn. Because what I have today is far more than I ever imagined in heaven. That is, if this is all I get, this is all I need. Because I am definitely living in the kingdom of God now. And it gets better and better and better every day.